I woke up at 6 in the morning, as I have every day for the last 40 years. Habit is second nature. The old house on the outskirts of Colfax greeted me with the familiar creak of floorboards and the smell of the coffee I'd set on the timer last night. The house has 3 bedrooms, but I only use one. Why do I need more? My wife died 15 years ago, and my son Patterson moved out long ago, barely out of college. My house doesn't look luxurious. Shabby furniture, an old TV, chipped paint on the walls in places. My neighbor across the street, Raven Fowler, raises chickens and brings me fresh eggs every morning, thinking he's helping poor retired Hubert. He would be greatly surprised to learn that this poor pensioner can buy his entire farm and 100 more like it without even noticing the damage to his bank account. I'm Hubert Chalmers. I'm 67 years old and I'm a billionaire. But only a few people in the world know that. My lawyer Finn Blackwood, a couple of old business partners, and my personal banker in Switzerland. To the rest of the world, I'm just an elderly retired man who once owned a small electronics business, but couldn't stay afloat. After coffee, I opened my laptop, the only modern thing in the house, and checked the stock market reports. My investments had brought in another 20 million overnight. Not bad for a loser, but that's a fact I'll keep to myself. The decision to hide my fortune didn't come to me immediately. When I was young, I was vain like many people. Starting with a small electronics repair shop, I managed to develop innovative microchip technology, which I then sold for a fabulous amount of money. I invested the proceeds in promising startups, real estate, and raw materials. Money made money, but wealth attracted parasites. Friends appeared out of nowhere. Women hung around my neck. Even relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly remembered I existed. The only sincere person around me was my wife Adeline, whom I met before I was rich. We were happy until cancer took her from me. After Adeline died, I realized that Patterson, our only son, had grown up to be a spoiled, selfish young man. Money had corrupted him. He had graduated from a prestigious university, but not because of his intelligence or hard work. I had paved the way for him, paying not only for his tuition, but also for the sympathy of his professors. 5 years ago, I made a decision to change my life. Officially, I declared bankruptcy of my last company, but in reality, I secretly sold it to a conglomerate in South Korea. I got rid of the mansion in the suburbs, moved into this modest house, and started living like a normal retiree. Patterson was furious when he found out about the bankruptcy. He yelled that I was a loser, that I had ruined his life, robbed him of his prospects. But instead of trying to support a broke father, he just stopped showing up in my life. Every once in a while, I'd get an angry text from him, most often when he needed money for another stupid thing. The phone rang as I was finishing breakfast. Seeing my son's name on the screen surprised me. Usually he didn't call, he texted. "Is something wrong?" "Father," his voice sounded fake joy. "I have great news, I'm getting married." I didn't answer right away. I hadn't seen him in almost a year, and he was calling to tell me about the wedding. "Congratulations," I finally said. "When are you going to meet the bride?" Actually, we were going to stop by today. Evelyn really wants to meet you." That sounded weird. As far as I knew my son, he wouldn't bother introducing his fiancée to an old beggar. Something's not right here. "I'll be waiting," I replied, trying to hide my surprise. They arrived in the afternoon. Patterson in an expensive suit that he clearly couldn't afford, and Evelyn Corrigan, a tall blonde with cold blue eyes and a smile that didn't affect those eyes for a second. "Dad, this is Evelyn," my son introduced when I opened the door. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Chalmers," she said, extending her hand with a flawless manicure. "Patterson has told me so much about you." I wonder what exactly, I thought, shaking her cold palm. The house, which had seemed spacious enough for me alone, suddenly felt cramped. Evelyn looked around with ill-concealed disdain, lingering on the worn upholstery of the chair, the old photographs on the walls, the cracked ceramic tiles in the kitchen. "Cozy," she said in a tone that implied the exact opposite. "Thank you," I said. "Tea, coffee?" "Do you have green tea?" she asked. "I don't drink regular tea, only organic. Decaf." Naturally, I didn't have any. I saw Patterson tense up, waiting for my reaction. "Only black, I'm afraid," I answered calmly. "Water then," she sighed, as if I'd offered her poison. We sat down in the living room. Patterson began to talk about the wedding, a lavish ceremony, 200 guests, a fancy restaurant downtown. I listened and wondered how much money he was going to use to organize such a celebration. His job at an advertising agency couldn't bring in enough for such luxury. And of course, we're looking forward to seeing you at the wedding. He finished his speech. Of course, I nodded. But Dad, he hesitated. You see, there will be important people there. Clients, business partners. What are you saying, son? Maybe we should update our closet. Evelyn stepped in. We could help you pick out something more appropriate for the occasion. I looked at my sweater and pants. Clean, neat, but not new. Thanks for your concern, but I have a suit. The gray one you wore to your mom's funeral? Patterson grimaced. Well, it's about 15 years old. It's perfectly preserved, I said calmly. Evelyn exchanged a glance with Patterson, and I could clearly read "I told you so" in it. They had obviously discussed me beforehand, and not in the most flattering terms. Look, Mr. Chalmers, Evelyn stepped forward. We understand your financial situation. Patterson told me about the bankruptcy and everything. But this is a special day for us. We want everything to be perfect. And that you don't look, Patterson hesitated for a word, not look like a penniless old man? I finished it for him. Dad, nobody says that. But that's what they think, isn't it? There was an awkward pause. Evelyn was the first to break the silence. We just want to help. We'll buy you a new suit. Think of it as a gift. No need. I can manage on my own. With what money? Patterson blurted out. Nesher, you're barely making ends meet on your pension. Don't worry about me, son. Evelyn stood up, glancing defiantly at her watch. We have to go, dear. We still have a meeting with the florist. Patterson nodded, clearly relieved to have an excuse to end this unpleasant conversation. Yeah, we gotta go. Dad, we'll send you an invitation. The wedding's in 3 weeks, Saturday. As they were leaving, I heard Evelyn whisper to Patterson, You didn't tell me it was that bad. He looks like a homeless guy. Patterson mumbled something back, but I couldn't hear it. The door closed and I was left alone. In the evening, I sat in my chair for a long time, thinking about the meeting. Something was bothering me. Why had Patterson suddenly decided to introduce me to his fiancée? Why invite me to a wedding if he was ashamed of my appearance? And most importantly, who was this Evelyn? I opened my laptop and typed her name into the search box. Evelyn Corrigan, 28 years old, works at the same ad agency as Patterson. Her social media pages were rife with photos from expensive restaurants, traveling fashion shows. She was clearly living a lifestyle she couldn't afford on the salary of an average ad agency employee. Digging deeper, I found information about her previous relationships. 2 broken engagements in the last 5 years, both times to wealthy men. I wondered if Patterson knew about this. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. The lights of Colfax flickered in the darkness. Somewhere out there, my son and his fiancée might be discussing me right now, laughing at the beggarly old man. Should I reveal my secret? Show them that the old man is not a beggar at all, but one of the richest men in the country? Let's keep it that way. At least for now. I want to see how far they'll go in their contempt. And then I'll decide what to do next. I walk back to my chair and pull an old photograph out of my desk drawer. Me, Adeline, and little Patterson at a picnic. We're smiling, happy, unaware of how our lives would change. What happened to that jolly boy in the picture? When did he turn into that arrogant, self-centered young man? Money, I thought. Money changed him. And now that he thinks I don't have money, he's showing his true colors. I wonder what he'll do when he finds out the truth. 2 weeks before the wedding, Patterson showed up unexpectedly on my doorstep. Without Evelyn, but with a bunch of catalogs and brochures. His face was a mixture of annoyance and embarrassment. Hi, Dad. He pushed past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. We're having trouble organizing, and Evelyn's on edge. I followed him silently into the living room. Patterson plopped down on the couch and spread out the papers on the coffee table. The restaurant had raised their prices at the last minute, and the florist was a nightmare. Just imagine, offering chrysanthemums instead of orchids. Evelyn almost fainted. I'm sorry, I said, not feeling any sympathy. Patterson looked at me appraisingly. Look, Dad, I know you're in a tough situation, but could you help pay for a photographer? The one we wanted was $500 more, and the budget's already busting at the seams. That's it. I held back a smile, so my beggarly appearance didn't stop Patterson from asking me for money. How much do you need? 2,000? He looked me straight in the eye. I'll pay you back as soon as I get my bonus. We both knew he wouldn't, just like he hadn't paid back the $1,000 he'd borrowed last year or the $500 6 months before that. I pulled a shabby leather wallet out of my pocket, specially purchased at a thrift store, and pulled out $500 bills. This is all I have, I said, holding out the money. Nah, I was saving for a rainy day. Patterson took the money as if he were doing me a favor. Thanks, he mumbled. Well, at least it's something. Is it enough for the wedding? I asked with feigned concern. I had to take out a loan, he sighed. But Evelyn deserves the perfect day. Plus, there'll be important people from the agency there. Connections, you know. I nodded. Connections I understood very well. Once upon a time, I'd started from scratch myself, and I knew the value of the right connections. But unlike my son, I never thought the world owed me anything for nothing. By the way, Patterson added, shoving the money carelessly into his pocket, Evelyn wants you to come to a costume fitting. She found a cheap rental. A rental? I questioned. Yeah. You don't buy a suit for one day, do you? He grinned. Tomorrow at 3. I'll send you the address. After he left, I stared at the closed door for a long time. My son, my flesh and blood. I had once hoped he would inherit not only my fortune, but my values as well. Where did I go wrong? Was it that after Adeline's death, I'd fallen headlong into work, leaving my son's upbringing to governesses and boarding schools? Or was it that I'd spoiled him too much, fulfilling his every whim? Whatever the reasons, the result was obvious. Patterson grew up to be a man for whom the most important thing was external gloss and other people's opinions. The next day I went to the costume rental parlor. Evelyn was already there, looking through racks of clothes. When she saw me, she frowned as if I'd brought a foul odor with me. "Ah, Mr. Chalmers," she said. "I'm glad you could come." "Call me Hubert," I said. "Of course, Hubert," she said my name as if it were indecent. "I've picked out a few options for you." The suits she'd chosen were defiantly old-fashioned and a couple sizes too big. I understood the intent. She wanted me to look ridiculous, an elderly clown in front of the elegant guests. "Try this one on." She handed me a gray suit with wide lapels that had been fashionable 30 years ago. "Oh, I'm afraid it's a little too big for me," I said. "It's all right, we'll sew it on," she said. "At your age, it's better to wear something a little looser." Loose? I took the suit and headed for the fitting room, but stopped at the door when I heard her phone ring. "Patterson?" Evelyn's voice changed to honey. "Yes, your father's here. Don't worry, I'll take care of it." Pause. "Of course, darling. I found the perfect suit for him. The old man will look exactly the way we want him to." Another pause. "Yes, yes, after the ceremony, we'll put him at the far table, with Aunt Pearl and the rest of the relatives no one knows," she chuckled. "We don't have to invite him to the photo shoot, do we? Let's just say he's tired and resting." I stepped quietly away from the door, clutching the suit in my hands. Well, at least they're consistent in their contempt. In the fitting room, I examined the suit more closely. Rubbed elbows, darned pocket. She'd picked the shabbiest outfit in the whole salon. I put it on and walked out to Evelyn. "Oh," her lips stretched into a fake smile. "Just perfect." I looked in the mirror. The man across from me looked like a caricature of an elderly gentleman. The baggy suit made me look like a sparrow wearing a crow's clothing. "I don't think—" "No, no," she interrupted. "This suit is beautiful, and the price is very reasonable." "I'll pay for it," I said, taking off my jacket. "Oh, don't worry." Her smile grew even wider. "Patterson's already put up the deposit. Consider it our gift." There was an obvious satisfaction in her tone, as if she were doing a favor for a homeless man. That evening, Patterson called and asked me to stop by his house to discuss the wedding details. I agreed, guessing he needed money again. Patterson's apartment was in a trendy neighborhood in Colfax, expensive housing for young professionals with aspirations of success. I knew the rent here cost at least $3,000 a month, much more than my son could afford on his salary. Evelyn opened the door, dressed in a silk robe and a glass of wine in her hand. "Oh, it's you." She didn't even try to hide her disappointment. "Patterson's in the shower. Come in, but don't touch anything." The living room was ultra-modern glass, chrome, minimalist. There were abstract paintings in thin frames on the walls and the latest issues of glossy magazines on the coffee table. Everything screamed for money they didn't have. "Have a seat." Evelyn pointed to the edge of the couch. "Patterson will be out shortly." She sat in the chair across from me, sipping her wine and defiantly checking her phone. I felt like an intruder. "It's a beautiful apartment," I remarked, breaking the silence. "Thank you," she looked up. "I designed it myself." "I have good taste. It must be expensive." "Quality costs money," she said. "Not everyone has to live in conditions like you." There was so much contempt in her voice that I chuckled. If she'd known that my shabby little house in Colfax had been bought with cash, and that I had enough in my bank account to buy the whole place with all the apartments. "What's so funny?" Her eyes narrowed. "Nothing." I shook my head. I just remembered something. There was an awkward pause. Evelyn was back on the phone, and I was looking around the room. My eye caught a stack of envelopes on the table, the bills apparently. On top was a late payment notice for a credit card. Patterson showed up 10 minutes later, with damp hair and wearing an expensive house suit. "Dad," he mimed joy. "Thanks for stopping by." We exchanged a formal hug. My son smelled of expensive cologne. "Did Evie tell you how the fitting went?" he asked, sitting down next to the bride. "Yeah, it was great," I replied. "Thanks for the suit." "You're welcome," he said with a wave of his hand. "Family after all." Evelyn snorted but quickly disguised it as a cough. "So what did you want to discuss?" I asked. Patterson looked back at Evelyn. "You see, Dad, we've been thinking, after we get married, we're planning on buying a house, mortgage and everything, and we need a down payment. That's what it is. How much do you need?" "30,000, Patterson blurted out. "I know it sounds like a lot, but—" "I don't have that kind of money," I interrupted. There was silence. Evelyn rolled her eyes and Patterson frowned. "But you must have some savings left, right? After you sold the house? Or your mom's insurance?" "It all went to pay off the company's debts," I lied. "All I have is my pension." "What are we supposed to do now?" Patterson exclaimed. "Live in this apartment forever?" "We could get a cheaper place," I suggested. Evelyn made a sound like an angry cat hissing. "Cheaper?" She set her glass down on the table with such force that the wine splashed onto the glass. "We're barely making ends meet because of this damn wedding. And now you're suggesting we move to some shithole like yours?" "Evie," Patterson tried to reassure her. "No, let her know." She turned to me. "We're up to our eyeballs in debt. Credit cards, education loans, and now a wedding. All because you're broke and can't help your own son." I stared at her in silence. I wondered if she knew that Patterson had never taken out a student loan. "I paid his tuition in full, every last dime." "Unfortunately, I can't help," I said calmly. "Maybe $500 or $600, but no more." Patterson jumped up from his seat. "Keep your pathetic handouts to yourself." He was red with anger. "We'll manage on our own." "As always," Evelyn added with a venomous smile. I stood up, realizing the conversation was over. "I'll see you at the wedding then." "Yes," Patterson hissed, "at the wedding." When I was at the door, I heard Evelyn hiss, "Useless old man." "We must get rid of him after the wedding. He should go to a nursing home or something." "Quiet," Patterson said. "He hasn't left yet." "I don't care. Let him hear me. He's no use to me anyway." I shut the door quietly behind me and headed for the elevator. Well, at least they're being honest. At home, I poured myself a whiskey and sat at the window, looking out at Colfax at night. Memories came flooding back. I remembered how I'd met Adeline. She worked as a secretary in the office next door, and I found an excuse to stop by every day. We were young and poor. We lived in a tiny apartment, saving money on everything, but we were happy. Then success came. My designs started to make money. The company grew. We moved into a big house, bought expensive cars, and then Patterson was born, our pride, our everything. Adeline wanted her son to know the value of money. She insisted he work summers like a normal teenager. But I thought my son deserved better. Why should he work in a diner when I could give him everything? What father doesn't want his child to have what he's been deprived of? Now I realize my mistake. I hadn't given my son the most important thing, the understanding that money was something to be earned, not a birthright. After Adeline died, everything changed. Patterson, then 18, grew increasingly distant from me. He demanded money, cars, entertainment, but was never interested in the business I had built. To him, I was just an ATM machine. And now that the ATM was broken, I was a liability. I finished my whiskey and made a decision. I'm going to this wedding. Not for my son or his fiancée, but for me. I want to see how far they're willing to go in their contempt. And then I'll decide if they deserve to know the truth about my condition. After all, what could be worse than finding out you lost billions because of your own greed and arrogance? The day of the wedding was surprisingly sunny for October. I woke up early, even though the ceremony was scheduled for 14 o'clock. The old suit Evelyn had picked out for me at the rental store was hanging on the back of a chair, as ridiculous as a jester's outfit. I stared at it for a few seconds, then opened the closet and pulled out a completely different suit, a dark blue one, custom made in London 5 years ago. It cost more than Patterson's entire closet, but it looked modest and elegant. This little act of defiance wasn't likely to please Evelyn, but tonight I wasn't going to play the pathetic beggar role they'd assigned me. Putting on my suit, I looked in the mirror. A tall, gray-haired man looked at me with a dignity that no amount of money could buy. I looked exactly the way a father of the groom should look, personable and elegant. I took a cab to the Golden Gate restaurant, where the ceremony was held. The doorman at the entrance gave me an appraising glance, obviously deciding whether I was worthy to enter this establishment, but still opened the door with a professional smile. Dozens of guests in festive attire were already gathered inside. Women in pastel dresses, men in suits. Waiters were scurrying between them with trays of champagne. A string quartet played in the corner. Patterson wasn't lying. It was organized on a grand scale, beyond his means. I stopped at the entrance, searching with my eyes for familiar faces. None. These people were all colleagues and friends of Patterson and Evelyn, or rather, people they wanted to impress. No wonder they were embarrassed to show me the broke old man to their glamorous acquaintances. "Who are you here to see?" A woman's voice sounded nearby. I turned around. A young girl with a clipboard, apparently the wedding coordinator, was looking at me with a professional smile. "I'm the father of the groom," I replied. "Hubert Chalmers." Her eyes widened in recognition, and her smile became a little less genuine. "Of course, Mr. Chalmers. Your table," she checked her clipboard, number 12, in the far corner of the room. Just like Evelyn promised, away from the eyes of the important guests. "Thank you." I nodded and headed to the designated spot. There were 3 older people sitting at the table, a gray-haired woman with a cat brooch, a full man with a glossy face, and a frail old woman who seemed to be dozing with her eyes open. "Good afternoon," I said hello, taking a seat. "Hello," said the woman with the brooch. "Are you also a relative of the bride?" "No, I'm the groom's father." "Oh," she was clearly embarrassed. "I'm sorry, My name is Pearl. I'm Evelyn's maternal third aunt, and this is my husband Erwin and my sister Gladys." The Aunt Pearl that Evelyn mentioned on the phone, also exiled to the back corner. "Nice to meet you." I shook their hands. "Hubert Chalmers." "We didn't know Patterson had a father," Erwin said lightly, and got a poke in the side from his wife. "Erwin, don't be silly. I was just—" Erwin hesitated. Evelyn had told me that Patterson had grown up without a father. That was new. I made a mental note of it. "As you can see, that's not entirely true," I replied calmly. Pearl was quick to change the subject. "What a beautiful wedding. It's so elegant. You must be very proud of your son," I only smiled back. The conversation gradually turned to the weather, health, and other neutral topics. I ordered myself a whiskey and silently watched what was happening in the hall. Soon the ceremony began. Patterson stood at the altar, tense but handsome in his tuxedo. Evelyn walked down the aisle toward him in a white dress that must have cost as much as a nice car. Her father, a full-bodied man with a red face, led her under his arm, glowing with pride. I wasn't invited to the rehearsal or involved in the preparations. I wasn't even introduced to the bride's parents. To everyone present, I was just another faceless guest. The priest, a young man with a trendy haircut, gave a speech about love and commitment. Patterson and Evelyn exchanged vows, rings, a kiss, applause, and I sat in my corner, feeling strangely detached. My son had married a woman who despised his father, who lied to her family about Patterson growing up without a father. And for what? So you don't have to explain why the penniless old man is sitting at the far table? After the ceremony, the guests moved into the banquet room. The tables were arranged around the dance floor, in the center of which stood a tiered wedding cake, white with silver decorations and figures of the bride and groom on top. I was back at table number 12. Aunt Pearl kept chattering about what a beautiful couple the newlyweds were, and her sister Gladys seemed to have fallen asleep, leaning against the wall. Patterson and Evelyn sat at the center table, surrounded by the bridesmaids and friends of the groom. They were accepting congratulations, laughing, drinking champagne. Not one of them even looked in my direction. Toasts, music, dancing, the traditional first dance of the newlyweds. Evelyn danced with her father, Patterson with the bride's mother. I watched all this while sipping my third glass of whiskey. Finally, it was time to cut the cake. Patterson and Evelyn held the knife together, smiling for the photographers. The cake was cut and the guests applauded. And then something happened that I totally did not expect. Evelyn took the plate with the piece of cake and headed toward me. I was alarmed. Her face was feigned kindness, but her eyes remained cold. "Dash, Mr. Chalmers," she said loud enough for the others to hear. "Would you like some cake? I brought you a piece because you never came up to congratulate us." All the attention of the guests turned to us. I saw Patterson tense up, but he stayed where he was. "Thank you, Evelyn," I said calmly. "That's very nice of you." "You're welcome," she smiled even wider. "You know that cake costs $500. That must be a fortune to you, right?" A chuckle ran through the room. I felt Aunt Pearl beside me freeze with embarrassment. "Money isn't the most important thing in life," I answered. "Only the poor say that," Evelyn countered, and there was laughter again. "But don't worry. Today you have a chance to taste how people with money live." She handed me a plate, but when I raised my hand to take it, Evelyn accidentally tripped. A piece of cake flew right into my face. The guests gasped. Someone laughed. I felt the cream and biscuit dripping down my face and onto my suit. "Oh," Evelyn exclaimed with feigned horror. "I'm so clumsy. I'm sorry, Mr. Chalmers." But her eyes were laughing. She was enjoying my humiliation. "Taste the dessert, you beggarly old man," she whispered, leaning toward me, but not so quietly that she couldn't be heard at the neighboring tables. There was loud laughter. I slowly wiped my face with a napkin, keeping my composure. Evelyn looked at me with triumph. And then something happened that neither of us expected. "Hubert? Hubert Chalmers?" came a loud male voice. I turned around. A tall man in an expensive suit was walking across the hall toward us. I recognized him instantly. Ezra Montgomery, my longtime business partner, and one of the few people who knew my true financial situation. "I can't believe my eyes," Ezra exclaimed as he came closer. "Is that really you?" "Hello, Ezra." I stood up, still wiping the cream off my face. "My God, it's been years." Ezra shook my hand firmly. "I saw you just now. Why are you sitting here in the corner? And what happened to your face?" "A little incident with the cake," I answered, glancing at Evelyn, who froze next to me with a confused smile. "Do you know each other?" she asked, shifting her gaze from me to Ezra. "Do I know you?" Ezra laughed. "We've created half the tech industry together. Hubert Chalmers is one of the greatest minds of our time, and a billionaire, by the way. His fortune on the Forbes list is estimated at $12 billion. There was absolute silence in the room. All eyes were fixed on us. "Billionaire?" Evelyn asked, her voice breaking into a falsetto. "Of course," Ezra patted me on the shoulder. "He's always been a humble guy, though. Remember, Hubert, when we launched that project in Singapore? You insisted that your name wasn't even mentioned in the press releases, even though you'd invested 80% of the capital." I saw Evelyn's face begin to change. Shock, disbelief, horror, all these emotions were changing like a kaleidoscope. "There must be some mistake," she whispered. "Dash, Mr. Chalmers. He went bankrupt." "Bankrupt?" Patterson said. "Bankrupt?" Ezra laughed. "Hubert? He just bought a controlling interest in Neotech Industries last month for $2 billion. The entire financial world is still talking about that deal." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Patterson, pale as a sheet, making his way toward us through the crowd of frozen guests. "What's going on here?" he asked in a shaky voice. Ezra turned to him. Ah, you must be Hubert's son. Congratulations on your marriage. Your father is a legendary figure. You must be proud of him. Patterson looked at me with an expression as if he had seen a ghost. Dash, Dad? Dash, he whispered. Is it true? I didn't answer. Instead, I turned to Evelyn, who was still standing there, opening and closing her mouth silently. I think you have cream on your face, I said calmly, and wiped my finger on her cheek, leaving a white streak. Let me help. Evelyn recoiled as if struck by a blow, her face contorted with horror. Yeah, I didn't know, she whispered. It was just a joke. I would never… Of course, I nodded. Just a joke. Ezra, not noticing the tension, went on. You know, I was amazed when I heard Hubert had moved to Colfax and lived such a modest life. But that's just the way he is. He's never boasted about his wealth, and his technology changed the world. Chalmers semiconductors are in every other smartphone. With every word he said, Evelyn grew paler and paler. Her carefully applied makeup now looked like a mask on a wax doll's face. Dash, Mr. Chalmers, she finally squeezed out, her voice trembling. Yeah, I'd like to apologize for the cake misunderstanding. It was a silly joke and I… Don't be, I interrupted her. Like you said, it was just a joke. By now the whole room had gathered around us. The guests were whispering, pointing fingers. Someone even pulled out a cell phone and seemed to be looking for information about me on the internet. Hubert Chalmers. Chalmers Electronics. I could hear some scraps of conversation. Oh my God, it's really him! Evelyn, seeing the reaction of the guests, began to panic. Tears glistened in her eyes. Please, she whispered. Can I talk to you alone? I can explain everything. I looked at her for a long moment. 5 minutes ago, this woman had publicly humiliated me, calling me an old beggar, and now she was ready to crawl at my feet when she heard about my condition. Okay, I finally agreed. Let's go outside. We headed for the exit of the hall. I could feel hundreds of eyes watching our every move. Patterson, still pale and shaken, followed us. In the hallway, Evelyn collapsed into the nearest chair and burst into tears. I didn't know, she repeated through her tears. I swear I didn't know. Patterson said you were broke, that you were barely making ends meet. I stared at her in silence. Her perfect makeup was smeared. Her white dress was tens of thousands of dollars worth of cake stained from my finger. Please, she raised her tearful eyes to me. You have to believe me. I would never… I thought, oh my God, what have I done? Patterson stood beside me, unable to utter a word. His world had just been turned upside down. Why? He finally got it out. Why did you hide it, Dad? Why do you think? I asked quietly. There was a heavy silence in the hallway. Evelyn continued to sob, smearing mascara on her face. Patterson stood with his shoulders slumped, as if an invisible weight had suddenly fallen on them. And I felt strangely empty. The moment I'd been waiting for and dreading at the same time had finally arrived. All this time, Patterson's voice was shaking. All this time you were rich, and you've been living in that wreck willingly? It's not a wreck, I answered calmly. It's the house I chose. But why? His eyes were filled with genuine incomprehension. Why pretend to be poor when you have billions? I looked at my son with a long look. How to explain to him? How to tell him that it was his attitude toward me after the supposed bankruptcy that caused my decision to go into hiding? A man in need, I said at last. When you thought I had money, you only came to me for it. And when you thought I was broke, you cut me out of your life. Patterson's face turned red with shame or anger, I couldn't tell. Did you set this whole thing up on purpose? To test me? No, I'm just tired of the falseness. Of friends who are friends with my wallet. Women who love my bank account. A son who… I didn't finish the sentence, but Patterson understood. His eyes filled with tears. It's not fair, he whispered. Was it fair to call me a loser? I asked quietly. Was it fair to shame me in front of my friends? Was it fair to plan on sending me to a nursing home after we got married? Patterson shuddered. You heard. Yes, I heard. The walls in your apartment are thin. Evelyn, who had been sobbing silently until then, suddenly raised her head. Dash, Mr. Chalmers. She tried to make her voice firm, but it was pathetic. I swear it wasn't my idea. It was Patterson who said you'd be a burden, and Evie, Patterson exclaimed. Shut up, but Evelyn couldn't stop herself. He said you'd always been a disgusting father, that you never took care of him, that you spent money on yourself and left him nothing, that's enough. Patterson grabbed her arm. Stop it. I looked at them both with growing disgust. They were worth each other. Deceitful, selfish, petty. I wonder, I said calmly. Sonim, Patterson never told you that I paid his tuition at Princeton? Or that I gave him a Mercedes for his 18th birthday? Or that I gave him monthly pocket money until he was 26? Evelyn stared at Patterson. You said you earned your own money for college. Her voice trailed off into a scream. You said you bought the car with your savings. Yeah, I wanted to impress you, Patterson mumbled. Dash, impress me? Evelyn laughed hysterically. Oh yes, you made an impression. You made a fool of me in front of all those people, in front of my parents, in front of my boss. At that moment, the door to the hallway opened and Ezra appeared on the doorstep. Hubert, is everything okay? He looked worriedly at our group. The guests are asking where you are. We'll be right back, I answered. Family talk. Ezra nodded and disappeared out the door. Yeah, I have to clean myself up, Evelyn whispered, looking at her reflection in the mirror on the wall. God, I look awful. She hurried off toward the ladies' room, leaving Patterson and me alone. Dad, he began, a pleading tone in his voice. Let's forget this whole thing. Let's start fresh. I was wrong, I admit it. But you're good at keeping things from me, too. I stared at him in silence. Even now, after everything that had happened, he couldn't honestly admit his guilt, always making excuses, shifting responsibility. Do you know what the saddest thing is? I asked quietly. You don't even realize what you did wrong. For you, the horror of the situation is that you didn't know about my money. Not that you humiliated your own father, not that you lied to your fiancée, but that you missed the chance to take advantage of my fortune. That's not true, Patterson objected, but I could see in his eyes that I had hit the mark. It's time to get back to the guests, I said, heading for the door. You're having a wedding after all. Returning to the banquet hall was surreal. As soon as we walked in, all the chatter died down. Hundreds of eyes stared at us. I felt like an exhibit in a museum. Hubert, Ezra waved me over. Come here, I want to introduce you to someone. I headed toward him, leaving Patterson standing alone. Ezra introduced me to some businessman who had long wanted to meet the famous Hubert Chalmers. I politely kept up the conversation, but my thoughts were far away. In the opposite corner of the hall, I spotted Evelyn, who had returned from the restroom with refreshed makeup and a strained smile. She was chatting feverishly with her parents, explaining something and gesticulating vigorously. Judging by their faces, the news of who her husband's father was came as much of a shock to them. Patterson was thrashing around the room, trying to maintain some semblance of control over the situation. He smiled, shaking hands, but his eyes restlessly searched the crowd for me. And the guests, they'd already split into camps. Some circled Ezra, prying for details about the mysterious billionaire. Others were whispering in corners, discussing the cake scandal and the subsequent exposure. Still others simply watched with undisguised curiosity. The wedding had become chaotic. I stood in the middle of all this madness and suddenly felt terribly tired. What am I doing here? Why had I let Ezra discover my secret? What was I trying to accomplish? Revenge? Justice? Or did I just want to see the house of cards of lies my son and his fiancée had built crumble? Dash, Mr. Chalmers. A woman's excited voice sounded nearby. I turned around. Evelyn's mother, the elegant middle-aged woman I'd seen at the ceremony, was heading toward me. Allow me to introduce myself, Diane Corrigan, mother of the bride. She held out her hand with a tortured smile. We're so glad you could make it to the wedding. I shook her hand, noting the cool touch and the overly firm grip. Evelyn told us about the misunderstanding, Diane continued. I assure you, if we had known who you were, we would have insisted that you be seated at the head table. Such an honorable man. It's not worth the trouble, I replied dryly. No, we insist. She took me by the arm. Come, my husband Warren is very anxious to meet you. I let her lead me away. Warren Corrigan, the same overweight man who had walked Evelyn down the aisle, greeted me as enthusiastically as if I were his long-lost brother. "Dash, Mr. Chalmers," he exclaimed, shaking my hand vigorously. "What an honor! I read about you in Forbes magazine. Your microprocessor patent is a revolution in the industry." I doubted he had ever opened Forbes, let alone understood the principles of microprocessors, but I nodded politely. "Evelyn is thrilled to have you as part of the family," Warren continued. "She's always admired successful people." I saw his eyes flick to my suit, as if assessing its value. Well, now that he knew the truth, he didn't see a shabby old outfit, but an expensive suit from a famous tailor. "Yes, I noticed her admiration," I replied with barely perceptible irony, especially when she threw the cake in my face. Warren's smile faltered. "It was a misunderstanding," he muttered. "Evelyn can be a little impulsive sometimes. She didn't mean to offend you." "Of course," I nodded. "Shenanabarinon. Calling me beggarly old man is just a way of showing respect." Diane laughed nervously. "Oh, you men and your jokes." She patted my arm playfully. "By the way, we're having a little reception next weekend. It would be wonderful if you could join us. There will be some very interesting people there. I've seen right through these people. They didn't know I existed an hour ago, and now they're trying to gain my trust. Not for me, for my money and my connections." "Unfortunately, I have other plan," I replied. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go." I politely but firmly released my hand from Diane's grip and headed for the exit. Several other guests tried to stop me on the way, but I just nodded politely and kept going. Evelyn caught up with me on the way out. "Dash, Mr. Chalmers," her voice sounded desperate. "Please don't go." I turned around. She stood before me, a beautiful bride in a cake-stained dress, with smeared mascara and trembling lips. "What do you want, Evelyn?" I asked tiredly. "Yeah, I want to apologize," she lowered her eyes. "What I did, it's unforgivable. I don't know what came over me. I was nervous about the wedding, and Patterson was always saying things about you. But that's no excuse. I behaved terribly, and I'm very, very sorry." I looked at her and saw no genuine remorse, only fear. Fear of losing access to the wealth that was so suddenly there. "You're apologizing not for humiliating me," I said quietly. "You're apologizing for doing it to a billionaire. If I were a really poor old man, you'd be laughing with your girlfriends at a good joke right now." Evelyn turned pale. "That's not true. I would never—" "Don't go on." I held up my hand. "You're not a good liar, Evelyn, at least not to me." Her face contorted with anger, but she pulled herself together quickly. "What can I do?" she asked with a pleading tone in her voice. "What can I do to make it up to her?" "Nothing," I answered simply. "Ahonim. Some things can't be undone. You can only live with the consequences." I turned around and headed for the exit. Evelyn didn't try to stop me. In the hallway, I ran into Patterson. "Are you leaving?" he asked, panic in his voice. "Right now?" "Yes," I nodded. "I've enjoyed your wedding enough. But we haven't even talked." He grabbed my arm. "Dad, we need to talk about this. This money, it changes everything." "No, Patterson," I pulled my hand free. "It doesn't change anything. Money doesn't make a man better or worse. It just makes him more honest about what he wants and what he does. Give me another chance." Tears welled up in his eyes. "Please." I looked at my son, a handsome young man in a tuxedo, with perfect hair and an expensive watch on his wrist. I had once loved him more than anything in the world. Maybe I still did, though in a different way. "Call me when you get back from your honeymoon," I said. "We'll talk then." I didn't wait for a cab. I just went outside and walked. Colfax was quiet and peaceful in the evening. People were coming home from work. Lights were on in the windows. Ordinary life went on as usual, oblivious to the drama that had played out at one flashy wedding. It took almost an hour to get home. I took my time, enjoying the cool evening air and the chance to be alone with my thoughts. When I finally entered my modest home on the outskirts of Colfax, I felt strangely relieved. There was no falseness or pretense here. The shabby furniture, the old photographs, the creaky floorboards, it was all real, mine. I poured myself a whiskey and sat down in the chair by the window. the same one Adeline liked to sit in when her illness still allowed her to get out of bed. She often watched the sunset from here, saying that every day brought something new and beautiful. You just had to be able to see it. What would she say now? Would she approve of what I did, or would she call me cruel and petty? She and I always had different views on Patterson's upbringing. She thought the boy needed more independence, and I wanted to protect him from the hardships I had experienced as a child. Maybe we were both wrong. Maybe it wasn't about money or lack thereof, but something deeper, the values we had or hadn't instilled in our child. The phone rang, interrupting my musings. It was Ezra. "Hubert, where are you?" His voice sounded concerned. "You just disappeared." "I'm home," I answered. "I was tired from the party." "There's so much going on here." Ezra snorted. "The bride is hysterical. The groom is drinking whiskey out of the bottle. The guests are betting on whether or not you'll come back. And the bride's parents are walking around with faces like they've swallowed a lemon." "I sympathize," I said without much sympathy. "I don't know what's going on," Ezra continued, "but I feel like I screwed up big time. I shouldn't have talked about your money, should I?" "Don't worry about it," I said. "The truth would have come out sooner or later. You just accelerated the process." After a short conversation with Ezra, I was alone again. Night was falling on Colfax, and the lights were going out in the neighboring houses. I sat in the dark, pondering what to do next. My experiment with the life of an ordinary retiree had come to an end. Now that the mystery was solved, there was no point in continuing this masquerade. But I didn't want to go back to my old life either. Mansions, yachts, private jets, none of that had ever brought me true happiness. What about Patterson and Evelyn? Would I ever be able to forgive them for the way they treated me? And should I? People don't change overnight. Even after realizing their mistakes, they tend to revert to habitual patterns of behavior. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my reverie. Who could have come so late? I opened the door and saw Patterson on the doorstep. He was without his jacket, his hair disheveled and his eyes red. "Dad," he whispered, "we need to talk." I looked at Patterson, frozen on my doorstep, and thought how strange things had turned out. He'd been a happy groom this morning, and now confused, red-eyed, he looked like he'd aged 10 years in one day. "Come on in," I stepped aside, letting him into the house. Patterson stepped hesitantly across the threshold, looking around as if he were seeing the house for the first time. Maybe he was. He'd only noticed the old furniture and shabby carpets before, but now he was probably looking for signs of hidden wealth. "Would you like a drink?" I asked, closing the door. "Yeah," he nodded. "Anything strong?" I poured him a whiskey and gestured for him to sit down. Patterson sank heavily into the chair and took a big gulp, wincing. "Where's Evelyn?" I asked, sitting down across from him. "In the car," he nodded toward the window. "Didn't dare come in yet." The silhouette of the expensive car Patterson had rented for the wedding was indeed visible outside the window. In the dim light of the street lamp, I could make out Evelyn's figure in the passenger seat. "You're still in your wedding suit," I remarked. "Shouldn't you be at the reception?" "It's all there." He waved his hand uncertainly. "Everything went downhill after you left. No one danced. All they talked about was you. About what Evelyn did. That you turned out to be a billionaire." He finished his whiskey in a gulp and set the glass on the table. "Evelyn's parents are furious. They think she ruined everything." "That she could have," he paused. "Could have what?" I asked. "To rub in the rich father-in-law's trust in a more subtle way." Patterson didn't deny it. "About that, yes." He rubbed his face with his hands. Jesus, what a mess. There was no remorse in his voice, only weariness and frustration. He didn't regret his attitude toward me, only the consequences. "Why are you here, Patterson?" I asked him bluntly. He raised his eyes to me, and there was a flicker of uncertainty in them. "Yeah, we wanted to apologize. For real. And explain." "Explain what?" "Everything," he said with a wave of his hands. Why I acted the way I did. Why I didn't appreciate you. I didn't respect you." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Patterson licked his lips nervously. "Could I have another whiskey?" I poured him one, feeling that it only delayed the inevitable conversation. Patterson took another sip, as if gathering his courage. "I'll get Evelyn," he said at last. "She wants to apologize, too." Without waiting for my answer, he left the house. Through the window, I saw him walk to the car and lean against the window. Evelyn was gesticulating furiously, clearly reluctant to get out, but Patterson insisted, and finally she gave in. They entered together, Patterson in front, Evelyn slightly behind, as if hiding behind him. Her wedding dress was crumpled and stained, her makeup smeared with tears, but even so, she managed to look beautiful. "Good evening, Mr. Chalmers," she said quietly, not looking me in the eye. "Hello, Evelyn," I said. "Sit down, don't just stand in the doorway." She sat down carefully on the edge of the couch, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl. Patterson sank down beside her, instinctively protective. "So," I looked at them both. "You wanted to explain something." Patterson glanced at Evelyn, as if deciding who would start. "When you declared bankruptcy 5 years ago, I was shocked. My whole life was based on being the son of a successful businessman. I had certain expectations, plans, and then it all came crashing down. And instead of supporting your father in his time of need, you decided to leave him." I finished for him. "I was angry," Patterson admitted. "I felt like you'd betrayed me, promised me a future, and then you lost everything." "I never promised you a future," I countered. "I wanted you to build your own life." "But you always gave me money," he exclaimed. "Cars, apartments, travel. And then suddenly you said you'd lost it all, and I had to live on my salary at the ad agency." In his voice sounded so sincere resentment that I involuntarily laughed. Was that so terrible? To live like an ordinary person? "You don't understand," he shook his head. "I was used to a certain way of life. I had obligations, debts, that you made counting on my fortune." I nodded. "I understand." Evelyn, who had been silent until then, suddenly raised her head. "Mr. Chalmers, I have a confession to make. When I met Patterson, he presented himself as the heir to a technology empire who was temporarily working in advertising to gain experience. I looked at my son, who clearly hadn't expected such a betrayal. Is that so? Interesting." "Evie," Patterson hissed. "No, let him know the whole truth." She straightened up. "Yes, it was his money that attracted me, or rather the promise of money. I grew up in a family where money was always tight. My parents worked hard to get me an education, but we always lived from paycheck to paycheck. I swore my life would be different. And then Patterson came along and promised me a fortune." I nodded. "Yeah," she didn't deny it. "Shut. But then I fell in love with him for real, honestly. And when I found out that there was no inheritance, that his father was an ordinary pensioner—" "You decided that the son should at least respect this pensioner?" I interrupted. "No, you began to treat me with even greater contempt, as a burden that might interfere with your perfect life." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "I was disappointed, angry, feeling cheated. And you decided to take that anger out on me?" "I'm not proud of it," she whispered. I looked at them both. Young, beautiful, selfish. They'd both lied to each other, built their relationship on false promises and unrealistic expectations. And now that the truth was out, they came running to me, not out of remorse, but out of fear of missing another chance at a rich life. "You know what?" I said, standing up. "Let me tell you something about how I really made my fortune and why I decided to hide it." I went to the bookcase and pulled out an old photo album, one of the few I'd brought with me when I moved into this house. Here, I opened the album to the first page. This is me in my 20s, just out of college because I couldn't afford tuition. My father was a truck driver, my mother a housewife. Money was always tight. Patterson and Evelyn looked curiously at the photograph of a thin guy with a lock of dark hair standing in front of a shabby garage. "This was my first workshop," I pointed to the garage. "I rented it for $30 a month and repaired electronics there. TVs, radios, later computers." I turned the page. "And this is me with Adeline, your mom." I looked at Patterson. "We met when she was 19 and I was 22. She worked as a secretary at the insurance company across the street from my workshop. Every day I'd find an excuse to stop by there, whether it was to ask for coffee or to make a phone call." I smiled, remembering that time. She was the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen, and the smartest. You know what she said when I finally got up the courage to ask her out? I thought you'd never make up your mind. In the picture, Adeline, young, with long blonde hair and a dazzling smile, had her arm around my shoulders. We stood in front of the lake, happy, in love. We got married a year later, I continued, turning the page. We lived in a tiny apartment in the suburbs, saving money. Adeline was still working, and I was growing my business. By that time, I was no longer just repairing appliances, but had begun to create my own circuits. My first success was a modification of a computer board that increased performance by 30%. I showed a picture of myself standing next to a table littered with electronic parts. I patented this modification, and it brought the first serious money. Not millions, of course, but enough to rent a decent office and hire a couple of employees. Then you were born. I looked at Patterson, and everything changed. I realized that now I was responsible not only for myself and Adeline, but also for a little creature that was completely dependent on me. Patterson stared at the photograph of Adeline holding the newborn in her arms. I started working 18 hours a day. Adeline took care of the baby. I took care of the business. I slept 4 hours a night, often in the office. That's when the real breakthrough came. I developed the microchip technology that changed everything. I sold the patent on it for $7 million. A lot of money in those days. I turned a few more pages, showing how our lives had changed. A new house, cars, vacations in the Bahamas. Money opened a lot of doors. I invested in promising projects, bought stocks, expanded the business. The fortune was growing. We moved to a big house in an upscale neighborhood. You went to private school. We made new friends, rich, influential. I paused for a moment, reminiscing. And then I started to notice a change. People treated me differently, not as a person, but as a money bag. Women flirted, men sought business connections. Even old friends changed. Some were jealous, others were constantly asking for a loan or offering win-win investments. Evelyn listened as attentively as if I were telling a fascinating novel. Patterson seemed bored. He'd heard the story before, though not all of it. Only Adeline was the same, I continued. She hadn't changed despite all the money. She still cooked on weekends even though we could afford a chef, picked out my ties and socks herself, and constantly reminded me where we came from so I wouldn't get cocky. I closed the album. When she was diagnosed, I was willing to spend a fortune to save her. I took her to the best doctors, paid for experimental treatments, but money was powerless against cancer. She was dying before my eyes and there was nothing I could do. There was silence in the room. Even Patterson looked touched. This was his mother we were talking about, after all. Before she died, I looked at my son. She made me a promise, to take care of you, but not to spoil you, to teach you to value not money, but what is truly important: honesty, labor, loyalty. I broke that promise. I kept giving you everything you asked for without asking for anything in return. And this is the result. Patterson looked away. 5 years ago, I realized I couldn't go on like this, I said. You'd turned into a spoiled, selfish young man who thought the world owed him. I decided the only way to change things was to take money out of the equation, force you to face real life. By faking bankruptcy? Patterson asked. Exactly, I nodded. I secretly sold the company, transferred the major assets to offshore accounts, and told everyone I was bankrupt. I moved into this house and started living like a normal retiree. What about your business partners? Evelyn asked. People like Ezra? Some of them knew the truth, I answered. The ones I trusted completely. The rest of them, I told them I wanted to change my lifestyle, to get away from the publicity. It happens in the world of big money. People get tired of the endless race and seek peace. I poured myself another whiskey. I was hoping you'd show some character. I looked at Patterson. That when you faced adversity, you'd fight, show your best qualities. But instead, you just turned your back on me. You thought a broke father was a burden, a stain on your reputation. Patterson lowered his head. And then you showed up. I looked back at Evelyn. And it got worse. You both thought I was a failure, a burden, planning on getting rid of the old man after the wedding. We didn't, Evelyn began, but she faltered under my gaze. Don't deny the obvious, I said calmly. I heard you talking in the apartment, about the nursing home, about how you'd be better off without me. Evelyn blushed. Patterson stared at the floor. And now that you know the truth, here you are, repenting, apologizing, not because you've realized you're wrong, but because you're afraid you'll lose access to my fortune. That's not true, Patterson exclaimed. We are truly sorry. We are? I raised an eyebrow. Then why didn't you ask me how I was feeling after your wife threw that cake in my face? Why didn't you ask if I needed help? All you care about is my money and how to access it. Patterson opened his mouth to object but found no words. Evelyn put her hand on his knee, as if urging him to calm down. Mr. Chalmers, she said quietly. You're right. We didn't just come to apologize. We were really hoping to mend relations. Mend the relationship is such a neat euphemism for gain access to your fortune. And how do you envision that, I asked. We could see each other more often, Evelyn suggested with hope in her voice. Invite you to dinners, spend holidays together. You could move into a normal house, Patterson added. We could help you get settled. And maybe you'd be willing to help us buy our own place? As an investment for the future? There it was, the true purpose of their visit. I couldn't help but admire their persistence. Even now, after everything that had happened, they were still thinking of ways to get my money. You know, I said, standing up, I have a better suggestion. Let's meet tomorrow at my lawyer's office. I think we should discuss everything officially. My fortune, my inheritance, the terms. Patterson's eyes lit up, and Evelyn couldn't hold back a smile. They looked at each other with such unconcealed delight that it almost made me laugh. Of course, Dad! Patterson jumped up too. Whatever you say. What time? 10 o'clock in the morning, I said. I'll text you the address. We'll be there, Evelyn assured me, rising from the couch and tugging at her wrinkled dress. Thank you. For understanding. They left, trying to contain their glee. I walked them to the door and watched their car disappear into the darkness of the street for a long time. I wondered what they were talking about. They were probably already dividing my fortune in their minds, planning shopping, traveling, a new life. I returned to the living room and sat in my chair, looking at the closed photo album. The story I told was true except for one detail. I didn't fake bankruptcy to teach my son a lesson. It happened by accident. After Adeline's death, I actually stepped away from the business, handing over management of the company to the board of directors. I stopped looking after the business, and I wallowed in my grief. When the financial crisis hit 5 years ago, the company's shares collapsed and I lost my controlling interest. The press called it bankruptcy, but in fact I had retained a significant amount of my fortune in other assets. Patterson's first reaction was to accuse me of all sins. He yelled that I had ruined his future, that he was counting on the inheritance, that I was a worthless father. And then he just stopped talking, only showing up occasionally when he needed money. That's when I decided not to dissuade him. Let him think I was broke. It allowed me to see his true colors, and they were not pretty. A year later, my investment in a technology startup yielded incredible profits, and I not only recovered my fortune, but multiplied it many times over. But I didn't tell anyone about it. I continued to live modestly, watching people react to poor Hubert. Well, tomorrow would be an interesting day. I had the night to finalize the plan that had been maturing in my head for the past few hours. A plan that would put everything in place once and for all. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of Finn Blackwood, my lawyer. Despite the late hour, he answered almost immediately. Hubert, what's wrong? Finn, I need your help. Set up a meeting at your office tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. My son and his wife will be there. Is everything okay? I could hear the concern in his voice. More than okay, I replied. Also, prepare the documents we talked about last month. It's time to put the plan into action. The morning was surprisingly sunny and warm for October. I woke up early with a sense of calm determination. Breakfast, showering, shaving, the usual. But today every action felt special, like part of some ritual. I'd chosen my best suit for the meeting, a dark gray suit with a subtle stripe, custom made in Milan. It was accompanied by a snow-white shirt and a deep blue silk tie. It made me look exactly the way a billionaire should look. I arrived at Finn Blackwood's office half an hour before the appointed time. His firm occupied the top 2 floors of a modern building in downtown Colfax. The spacious office with its panoramic windows overlooking the river and city park always had a calming effect on me. Finn met me in the lobby, a tall, trim man in his 50s with early gray hair and a keen eye. Hubert! He shook my hand firmly. The papers are ready, just like you asked. Thank you, Finn, I nodded. Do you think they'll be surprised? I'd say they'll be shocked. He grinned. Cool. But are you sure this is the way you want to go? It's a radical solution. I'm absolutely sure, I answered. Sometimes you have to cut off a diseased limb to save the whole body. Finn nodded understandingly. We went into the conference room, where the conference table was already set up with a carafe of water, coffee cups, notepads, and pens. Strictly businesslike, I invited the notary like you asked, Finn said. She'll be here in 15 minutes. Great, I sat down at the head of the table. And have them make coffee. Good coffee. One last thing. At 10 o'clock sharp, the receptionist announced the arrival of Patterson and Evelyn. They entered the conference room holding hands, apparently for moral support. Both were dressed with care. Patterson in an austere suit, Evelyn in an understated beige dress and jacket. No trace of yesterday's despair, just a wary hopefulness in her eyes. Good morning, Dad, Patterson tried to smile. Dash Mr. Blackwood. Hello, Evelyn nodded, fidgeting nervously with the strap of her purse. Have a seat. I pointed to the chairs across from me. Finn, would you excuse us for a moment? I'd like to talk to Patterson and Evelyn alone first. The lawyer nodded and left the room. There was silence broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Patterson coughed. So, what did you want to talk about? I stared at them both, trying to find something that reminded me of the boy in the picture, of the sincere girl Evelyn might once have been, but all I saw were two calculating adults who would do anything for money. I thought a lot last night, I said at last. About us, about what happened, about what's going to happen next. They came forward, catching every word, and I made a decision, I continued. A radical one, but the only right one. What was it? Patterson asked, his voice trembling. We'll talk about that later, I smiled. I want to hear something from you first. If you could go back in time, what would you change in your attitude toward me? Patterson and Evelyn looked at each other, clearly not expecting such a question. Evelyn spoke first. I would never have allowed myself to do that disgusting thing at the wedding, and I would treat you with the respect you deserve. Even if I were really a poor old man, I clarified. She hesitated but quickly found herself. Of course, money doesn't determine a person's worth. What a magnificent lie. I shifted my gaze to my son. What about you, Patterson? He took a deep breath. I wouldn't have turned my back on you after your supposed bankruptcy. I would have supported you, helped you start over. We'd have made it together as a family. Like a family, I repeated thoughtfully. Interesting choice of words. You know, I've often wondered over the last 5 years, what is a family? People connected by blood, or shared values, or maybe just mutual caring? Patterson shrugged uncertainly. I guess it's all of the above? What does the word father mean to you? I asked. An ATM machine? A source of inheritance? Or something more? Dad, why the questions? Patterson was beginning to lose patience. We're here to discuss business, not philosophize. Business, I nodded. Sure, it always comes down to business, doesn't it? I pressed a button on the desk, summoning the secretary. Would Mr. Blackwood and the notary please come in? A moment later, the door opened and Finn and a petite woman with a folder of documents entered the conference room. They sat down on either side of me. Let me introduce Olivia Stroud, the notary, I said. She'll be attending our conversation to witness everything said here. Patterson looked puzzled. Why do we need a notary to discuss family matters? Because we're not just talking about family matters, I answered. It's about legally binding decisions. I opened the folder Finn had handed me and pulled out some documents. My net worth as of today is $12,340,000,000, I said, looking directly at Patterson and Evelyn. That includes real estate, stocks in various companies, bonds, artwork, and more. My watch collection is worth more than the entire wedding you've arranged. Evelyn's eyes widened and Patterson swallowed. The question is, I continued, what happens to that money after I die? Who will inherit all this wealth? Well, I hope so, Patterson began, but I raised my hand to stop him. Let me finish, I said firmly. I've made my decision, and I want you both to hear it right now. I picked up the first document and placed it in front of me. This is a notarized statement of renunciation, I said calmly. In it, I formally disown you, Patterson, as my son. Legally, that means you no longer have any rights to my inheritance, my property, or even my last name if you want to keep it. Patterson's face turned pale, and Evelyn froze like a statue. You can't, Patterson whispered. This is some kind of joke, isn't it? No, it's not a joke. I signed the document and handed it over to the notary. From this moment on, you are no longer my son. Not legally, not morally. Evelyn suddenly came to life. But that's monstrous. You can't just give up your own child. I can, I answered calmly. You said yourself yesterday that money doesn't determine a person's worth. Well, blood relation doesn't determine it either. It is determined by deeds. And Patterson's deeds have shown that he is not worthy to be my heir. Patterson jumped up. That's ridiculous. I'm your son, damn it. I'm your flesh and blood. You can't just cut me out of your life. Why not? I asked. You did the same thing to me 5 years ago when you thought I was broke. Even worse, you didn't just cut me out. You despised me. You were ashamed of me. You planned to send me to a nursing home. He collapsed back into his chair, unable to find the words. And now the second document, I picked up the next paper. My will, which gives my entire estate, every penny of it, to the Fluffy Paws Cat Shelter in Colfax. The cat shelter? Evelyn's voice broke into a shriek. You're leaving $12 billion to the cats? That's right, I nodded, signing that document as well. At least they're genuinely happy when they see me, instead of pretending to be happy for money. Patterson covered his face with his hands. His shoulders were shaking, whether from sobs or rage. You can't do this, he muttered. It's madness. On the contrary, I argued, it's the sanest decision I've made in a long time. You know what your biggest problem is, Patterson? You've never tried to earn anything on your own, always waiting for money to fall into your lap. From me, from your inheritance. You didn't even choose your wife out of love. You chose her because she seemed like the right match for the heir to a technology empire. That's not true, he exclaimed. I love Evelyn. Does she love you? I shifted my gaze to my sister-in-law. Or your non-existent millions? Evelyn turned pale but did not answer. In any case, I continued, the decision is made and legally enshrined. You can try to challenge it in court, but, I glanced at Finn, you don't stand a chance. Mr. Blackwood has prepared everything perfectly. I don't believe it, Patterson whispered. I don't believe you could be so cruel. Cruel? I raised an eyebrow. Is it cruel to require a man to be honest, caring, decent? I gave you 5 years to develop those qualities. 5 years when you thought I was poor. And how did you use them? Insulted me, neglected me. Let your wife humiliate me in front of 200 people. Evelyn suddenly burst into tears, loudly ugly with smeared mascara. I didn't know, she shouted through her tears. I swear I didn't know you were a billionaire. If only I had known. That's just it, I said quietly. If you had known, you would have acted completely differently, not out of respect or love, but because of the money. That's the sad part. I gathered the documents into a folder and handed them to the notary. Ms. Stroud, please register everything properly. Of course, Mr. Chalmers, she nodded. Is that all? Patterson asked, lost. You're just cut us out of your life? Not exactly. I pulled an envelope out of my pocket and placed it on the table. There's a check for $10,000. It's compensation for my not showing up at your wedding. Consider it my last gift to you. Evelyn looked at the envelope as if it were a snake ready to bite. 10,000? She whispered. After all you said about billions? Be grateful for that too, I replied. Unlike you, I keep my word. I promised you a wedding present, and here it is. Now, if you don't mind, I have an appointment in half an hour. I'm up from the table. Finn and the notary got up too. Patterson and Evelyn sat stunned, unable to believe that their dreams of wealth had just been shattered. Goodbye, I said, heading for the door. And don't try to contact me. Mr. Blackwood will handle all communications on my behalf. I walked out of the conference room feeling incredibly light, as if I had shrugged off a heavy weight I had been carrying for years. Waiting for me in the reception area was a middle-aged man in a modest suit, Harlan Stone, the director of the Furry Paws shelter, whom I had invited to the meeting today. Mr. Chalmers, he jumped up when he saw me. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Our little orphanage is in great need of support, and any help. Don't worry, Mr. Stone, I shook his hand. I've already made all the arrangements. Let's sign the papers and go to your orphanage. I want to personally meet the future heirs of my fortune. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in business class on a plane bound for New Zealand, the first stop on my trip around the world. Next to me lay a newspaper with the headline, Billionaire Hubert Chalmers renounces son and bequeaths fortune to cats. Journalists prowled around my house for a few days, but they didn't find me. I had already moved into a small oceanfront bungalow where I planned to spend the next month. The Furry Paws shelter had already received the first installment of $5 million to expand its grounds and improve conditions for the animals. Harlan Stone, who at first thought I was joking, now chaired the board of directors of a charitable foundation set up to manage my future legacy. According to my will, the foundation was to help not only cats, but other homeless animals across the country. Patterson and Evelyn disappeared from view, probably hiding from embarrassment and ridicule. Finn reported that they had hired a lawyer to challenge my decision, but they had no chance. Everything had been handled flawlessly. I looked out the porthole at the clouds passing below and thought about the fact that I was finally free. Free from toxic relationships, from fake love, from having to pretend to be someone I'm not. There were new places, new people, new experiences ahead of me. I might even find real friends, the kind of friends who don't care how much money I have in my checking account. Somewhere deep inside, I still felt the pain of Patterson's betrayal. After all, he was my only child, a part of me and Adeline, but I knew I had done the right thing. Some lessons can only be learned through loss. And if someday, even years from now, Patterson would realize that money wasn't the most important thing in life, if he learned to value sincerity and honesty over material possessions, then maybe I could call him son again. But for now, the $12 billion will go to the cats. At least they know how to be grateful. The stewardess offered me champagne. I took the glass and raised it in a silent toast. To a new life, to freedom, to a future without falsehood. The sun was rising outside the airplane window. A new day was beginning.